Hey guys, this is Daniel with PwnCNC. I'm coming at you with another tip or another project that I'm working on. Let's see. So since installing my aluminum bed, I knew that I wanted to put a spoil board on top of it. The previous designs that I've used didn't really provide enough holes for me to access whenever I have different size boards or whatnot. So I wanted to have, rather than having a 1x1 design, I went with a 2x2 interlace design. And what that means is you've got your 4 screws, and then you've got right in the middle, you got another screw right there. So they're basically offset, right? It basically increases or doubles the number of screws per board. But then I also wanted a couple of other challenges. First, I needed it to attach to my aluminum wasteboard, which I have, and whenever I was installing prototype 1, I realized that just a straight through hole wasn't going to be enough. I needed something that I could adjust the board just slightly so that I can get it into place and catch on one of the T-nut screws. So what I've done is I've changed the design so that instead of a single straight through hole, I've got a little cavity here, so a little vertical cavity, so that means whenever I put the board down, I can adjust it just slightly in order to catch the T-nut that may be underneath, that may be in a slightly different position, or your aluminum threads may not line up perfectly with a single hole, perfectly measured out, so this kind of accounts for that slop. Instead of the hammer-in T-nuts, which gave me a headache whenever I was installing this one, this one's got the hammer-in threaded nuts, or hammer-in T-nuts, so that you can put your screw down in, it catches, but then on the other side, you hammer them in. For my prototype 2, I wanted something a lot easier. And in this case, I went with these easy lock threaded inserts. So essentially you have a special nut, or I went ahead and bought their Easy Lock 9000 connector or bit, and you put your nut on it, you put it right on your drill, you just drill it right in. There may be 128 per board, but at least screwing them in, it was a lot easier than hammering them in. And just for notation, I picked up Easy Lock 901 420-13. They're 100 pack bags. And of course I needed 5 of them because I've got 4 boards with 128 each. So I needed just a little extra. In fact, I may have picked up 6 now that I do the math in my head. But the last feature that went into my spoil board, well, I guess 2 more features. One of them is I wanted a quadrant design. I wanted something that could theoretically be mailed in the mail. I'm sure it's not too large, it's not the full 32 by 32 size, but the smaller size does make it a little easier to mail if I wanted to mail it. The other idea was, being that it was smaller, I could make each one right here on whatever spoil board happened to be on my system at the time, make 4 of them without stretching the pure limits of my machine, plus I could take advantage of my fences for repeatability and that sort of thing. The last feature I want to talk about is for the bit setter. So I picked up the bit setter. However, I have not used it yet. It's been sitting in a box over on the bench. And of course, because the wasteboard is bumped up against the front plate, I needed a little bit of a notch. It's a minor feature, but a little bit of a notch so that it accounts for the bit setter that will be sitting roughly 4 inches from the end of the plate. So let's get started. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove prototype 1, and I will install prototype 2. Then we'll go on to surfacing. There's a couple of interesting things with the surfacing. Obviously these, well, not obviously, but these particular boards are 15 by 17. So it's not quite exactly 32 by 32. So we need to account for that. So the Carbide Create can do 32 by 32 on the wasteboard. Obviously we're not going to go up past the front of the plate here. So we've got roughly 30 inches back. and then 34 inches wide. So we're going to be able to take care of most of it, and then we're going to have to jog it on a couple of inches on either side, or the inch on either side, in order to finish off surfacing the board. But this puts it at the maximum size that my HDZ setup can handle. You might be able to, or might need to adjust it slightly for other designs, but I think since most of you probably have the XXL, or at least the XL, you could probably just use 2 of these boards instead of all 4, since you're doubling it. Yeah, won't go into details there, but let's go ahead and get started. I have started to remove the fences from my current board. I'm just using a simple 1/4 by 20 inch screws to actually secure it, since it's kind of what I've standardized with all of my Shipoko bits and such. Right below each one of these holes is a T-nut that is, or a slide-in T-nut, which is within the aluminum bed track. So for reference, what we've got here is from the edge of my aluminum wasteboard, I'm going in roughly 6.5 inches into that thread there, or into this track here. From the edge of the plate, or the edge of the where you'd measure the bit setter from on this side, comes in a little over 7 7/8. So that exact track. What I did initially was I measured from each side of the plate and put a marker here so I knew exactly where dead center of my machine is, which is this, where these 2 extrusions meet. And then of course measured out from there. Since I have 4 of these all made up with my threaded inserts in place, I take the one with the bit setter, put it up here in the front quadrant. You can see I'm just slightly off, so I'll adjust it. Being that this is a track, it should be real easy to see where it all fits together. There, now I can see the threaded insert on all of them. Let me get some washers, some extra washers. Since the washers didn't come out of the previous board, I'm going to have to fish those out with a little bit, and that'll take me a little while. So I take my 1/2 inch by 1/4, because there isn't a lot of distance that I need to travel here to get to the nut. So we're going to thread in each one with a washer. Whenever I finish here, I will zoom in and let you see what's going on. Just thread it in so that the track nut catches the screw, but we don't necessarily need to tighten it down yet. Let's get all of the boards screwed in, and then we'll mess with the adjusting as needed, and then we can tighten it down. So we're going to zoom in on one of these nuts. You see that it's perfectly lined up in the adjustment, or within there. Of course, it's a little tight on some of them, but all of them are in there. Everything looks nice. See, we seem to be getting a really nice connection there in the middle. I'll make some minor adjustments just to kind of clean this up a little. There. Now we'll tighten that up and we'll be good to go. All right, before I go too much further, I do want to make sure my bit setter actually does work. Since this is a prototype, I'm going to set it right down in there. Looks like I'm going to need to dig out a little bit of my spacer, my plug spacer here, but that's not terrible. So I'm going to take my production boot. That's the dirty one that's getting all messed up. I'm going to set that up. We're going to use the white side, what is this? White side 6210. It is a 1-inch surfacing bit with a 1/4-inch shank on it. So you may notice I've got some hanging wires here. It's because I haven't finished all of my proximity switch upgrades yet. I'm still working on that. This is for the X-axis. I've already got my Z-axis installed, and of course I have my Y-axis. It still needs to be put in place as well. So at this point, I'm going to put my bit on. Now I'm using a 65 millimeter 110 volt 1.5 kilowatt spindle, water cooled spindle. That's what's over here. All the tubes run through here. I've got some extra, or I'm going to soon have some 40 millimeter brackets coming out for securing the chain. I've got a couple for the Y. I've got a Y plate which extends it out and makes the wires work a little better. Goes right into the X bracket, and then of course it comes right up here and connects right into the plate, the standard plate. Then of course I got the wires coming up. I've got my coolant up there, and all my plugs up here in the corner, including my suction. So now that I got my bit in place, I can go ahead and install my boot. Now, because this is a surfacing bit, I am going to surface it, or I'm going to level it or zero out the bit on the surface with just a simple paper method. So I'll show you that here later. We'll fast forward here. Now, because this is a 1-inch bit, that does come exceedingly close to the edge of the acrylic. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure whenever I'm positioning the boot on either side here, if you have one side up higher than the other, that will really offset your boot as it's near the blade or near your bit. So what you're going to want to do is make sure you're level on both sides, and if necessary, you can take the boot off and adjust the wings in case you're off front to back. Let's start my spindle. My power, and I'm going to go silent here for a second. I'm going to mute you guys so that you don't hear too much of that noise. So it looks like I had a few minor issues during the event of my surfacing here. Nothing too major. One, my hose popped out of my clamp here. And of course the cause is, and I zoomed in on the video there, my extra hoses, my tubes here that are going to my spindle are kind of interfering with the hose fully seating into the clamp. If it was actually fully seated, it wouldn't have popped out like that. But of course, if you've got too much tension on your hose back here on your mounting, however you got your hose coming to your machine, if there's too much tension, this is still a spring, so even if it was fully seated, if there's too much tension on the hose, it would still pop it out. This is just a press fit clamp or bracket after all. So the other issues I've run into, and you saw whenever I zoomed in on the wasteboard, was machine is trammed this way, but it is not trammed this way, and as a result, I'm seeing basically horizontal ridges, very minor. I can't really feel them. They're just barely there. Not really anything to worry about. Nothing I'm going to care about at this point. It's not causing any major ripples in the surface, so the surface is pretty level. And of course, once I wipe away the dust, those lines almost become invisible. The other issue I ran into is I completely did not look at my file and determine how deep I was actually cutting into this. And whenever I came back to run that last pass, I went in a little deep, so I've got a little circular indentation here. It's way off in the corner. not likely to affect any of my cuts. So I'm not really worried about that one either. The last thing that I noticed was the wasteboard from front to back. It is exactly 30 inches, but it turns out if my machine is fully back, I could probably get another 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch. So I may actually modify these wasteboards so that the design is instead of 15 inches exactly, 2 of them make 30. I would probably expand that out so that it covers the full front to back width. The goal of the surface of the spoil board is to be the full cutting area of your machine. So if you've got the stock machine or you have the HDZ, you've got different dimensions as far as what you can cut inside of the main bed area. The HDZ does come forwards almost 28 millimeters, I believe. So that means it puts the spindle and the bit even further in front of the machine than before. So you lose some of that rear connection. On the stock carriage, you can get almost a full 32 inches all the way back there. But with the HDZ, you can get about 30.5, 30 3/4. So I'm gonna have to adjust the wasteboard for that. But otherwise, it's literally reached the extent of my machine, which is perfect. I did notice whenever I mounted it back in the back corner, there's a slight ridge along the surface, and I'm gonna just take a little shaving, a hand planer to shave that down so that it's surface. I very rarely get back in the back, so I'm not terribly worried about that. Yeah, so that's mounting and surfacing your board. Hope you enjoyed the design. Give me your feedback. I will definitely evolve this to prototype 3, probably with the additional modifications, and possibly, and I haven't figured it out yet, I'm thinking about something that I might be able to insert into these square holes here so that it gives a nice flat surface so that dust and debris doesn't build up in those areas since there are so many of them on the surface. This is Daniel from PwnCNC. Thanks for watching.